and welcome to All the Things.
I am Monique Dusan.
And I am Krista Bontrager, also known as Theology Mom. And
Girl,
this is the show.
we talk about all the things related to God, the Bible, and real life. I was putting in the chat because I was like, I think I hear my washing machine. I'm washing pillows. And it's like boom, boom, boom. So I was like, oh no, maybe I need to get up real quick.
No, you're good. You're good. And we are professionals. We know how to talk on a live show, right? We know how to do the introduction.
Okay. How you doing?
Well, it's finally starting to warm up here. We're hitting almost 100 now every day.
Look at you guys and those baby temps. Look at that. It's good for you. Good for you to come along.
How are things there in the middle of the desert? Are you cremated yet?
Basically, Friday was 117. I think it was the hottest day of the year for us here in Phoenix so far. I stayed inside today, so I don't really know what is going on outside, but it's warm. It is warm. That's all I can say. It's warm.
Well, I am busy. I am working, as you know, on a very large project. I am hoping to finish by Friday.
Well, look at you.
The super secret project in the secret dark place where I go.
Won't he do? Won't he do it?
We will keep everyone posted.
We will see. He's going to do something.
I hope so.
Today's conversation is on abortion, and I'm really excited about this conversation because I got to be a part of it.
Yeah.
We are speaking with Dr. John Ferrer about the Abortion Museum, and it's an online virtual museum that you can walk through and kind of look at the history of abortion all the way through current day. But this season of All the Things is focused on justice, and abortion is a huge justice conversation. How do we fight for biblical justice for those who are unborn?
Yeah.
It's one piece of the justice conversation, and I'm excited to dig deeper into this conversation. We're having quite a few conversations on justice. We had a conversation with abolitionist Wes Fuller. We'll have a conversation with pro-life. Oh goodness, I'm forgetting his title, but pro-life veteran advocate. Thank you for the word. I was like, what is the word I'm looking for? Scott Klusendorf. And so we want to really equip you to be able to think well about conversations on abortion and to understand a biblical position on it. And we'll move forward in unity from there. So go ahead, Krista.
I was going to say that I think a lot of people associate our ministry with, Center for Biblical Unity. You're a race ministry. That's all you talk about, But one of the other major pillars that we talk about is justice issues. And so that's why we've been focusing this season on justice. But as we're going to see in the Abortion Museum, there is a certain overlap between the justice conversation and the race conversation when it comes to abortion. So looking forward to learning more about that. Okay. With that, I think we're going to bring on our friend, John Ferrer. Dr. John Ferrer, I should say.
Hey, nice. Good to be here. Thank you for having me. It's a blessing and a privilege to be part of such a esteemed crew of refined intellectual
very refined
thought leaders.
Well, you only been here for a few minutes. We'll see what kind of ride this is. Hopefully we all survive and get to the end. Thanks for joining us. I just want to start out with you telling us just about who you are and where did the idea of a virtual abortion museum come from?
And most importantly, tell us who your wife is.
I wasn't going to say that. I was like, I'm going to let him speak on his own.
About that. All right.
Well, I don't have an independent identity. I am affixed to a celebrity in Hillary Ferrer. She has my name, but she also has the celebrity status, and I'm just a tag along. But she is the founder of Mama Bear Apologetics. She's a wonderful woman, and she has been a strong encouragement to me in this museum project. This museum idea probably started 15 to 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I have been doing apologetics for at least 20 some years. I did my degrees thinking I was going to go into local church ministry, uh, and then eventually towards some kind of education ministry. Because every ministry opportunity I got, I found myself trying to make it into a classroom and teaching. And so it just made sense. Why don't I get a terminal degree and just get as prepared as I can to answer questions, to teach, to train, to help include the mind in the holistic Christian task of loving the Lord with everything we've got, and that includes your mind. And so I aimed for that. Well, I ended up in Christian education for about 6 to 8 years, depending on how you count it. Um, and that included teaching an ethics class. And every year when we got to that section about bioethics and abortion, my aim was to prepare the students to be prepared so that any objection that they're going to hear from pro-choicers, moderate pro-lifers, any of the big ideas that constitute the abortion debate, they will have heard it already. I didn't want them to get bowled over with this. I've never heard this before. This is earth-shattering. What am I going to do? I want all of those objections to feel like, oh yeah, my teacher told me about this. They may not remember all the answers, but even knowing that there are some answers and that it's not as overwhelming as it might seem at first, that's huge in preparing students for the world. Well, in trying to find the best arguments for abortion, because I wanted to steel man it, because I come from an evangelical Christian background. I am pro-life because I'm pro-human and pro-Imago Dei and pro-Bible and pro-God's perspective on humanity as communicated in Scripture. And it's no accident that the testimony of the church, the like 99% uniform testimony of the church is anti-abortion when it comes to this issue. 99% of it is anti-abortion, and I fall in that line. So I come from that background being pro-life. I wanted to prepare them for pro-choice objections, and I tried to find the best I could, and I was coming up empty. The more I tried to find really good arguments for abortion choice, I couldn't find that many. There's maybe three or four. And then if you go with some of the ones that are common but not really that well developed, there's maybe a dozen. And that's it. That's all you really have in terms of the apologetics of the abortion debate. Now, when I say the abortion debate, obviously, this isn't just something that's a matter of ideas in our heads. This is life. This is social issues. This is family. This is society. This is justice issues. And a lot of that, people make their decisions before they even thought clearly. And so I know that apologetics is not the be all and end all of the abortion issue, but it's something. It's an important aspect, and I can do that because that's my training, that's my skill set. Well, around that time, when I started realizing that the abortion side just doesn't have that great of an argument, they almost invariably have to suspend humanitarianism, just leave that out of the equation, and then start talking about human rights in terms of individualistic, libertine privilege to do what you want as long as it's legal, and consequences. I'm not really thinking about responsibilities. I'm just thinking about liberties. Yet liberty without responsibility is anarchy. That's not actually liberty. And yet that misconception undergirds a whole lot of the pro-choice worldview. That's what I was finding. And I realized that people aren't necessarily getting argued into the pro-life side out there. Some people see abortion, and that alone is enough to change their minds. And through experience, through these conversations, I would realize I try to have these conversations about, fetal personhood and whatnot. And often it would end up in this semantic debate. We're just debating concepts instead of talking about what's going on in abortion. And it dawned on me, the best argument against abortion is an honest look at abortion. The whole pro-choice side depends on keeping people from actually looking at what abortion really is. They're not defending abortion per se, they're defending the idea of abortion. The idea of abortion represents freedom, represents empowerment, represents equality. And basically, you have to get it into sort of the theological realm, where it's mostly a faith-based claim about how it empowers and dignifies you as an individual. And that's what you aspire to by freeing up access to abortion. And when you get down into the nitty-gritty of what it actually does to women, what it actually does to the children in utero, what it actually does to families, neighborhoods, communities, and society, it's absolutely repulsive. And so, why am I spending all this time trying to argue about fetal personhood, for example, when I could just be stripping away their case, all the euphemisms and the distractions, saying, hey, I noticed you stopped talking about the child in utero. When you say fetus, are you still talking about human fetuses or something else? Why are you leaving the human out of the human equation here? And I just started focusing on just taking the best cases that they have, peeling away the euphemisms, peeling away the propaganda, and just let it sit. And I found that it was terribly uncomfortable for pro-choicers because when they have to defend abortion for what it really is, not just for what it represents, they don't really have a case. I didn't really have to get into the apologetics. I didn't have to get into the pro-life position all that much. All I really had to do was say, is your worldview when it comes to justice, race, gender, and sex, society, is your worldview betrayed by your commitment to abortion? And when that was kind of whirling around in my mind, I realized, how are we going to communicate this? This is something that you can't just have a single argument and persuade people to. This is more like an experience that people have. And that's when it dawned on me, and this is probably 15, 20 years ago. We need a museum that shows people the real history of abortion, the unvarnished reality of what abortion is. We don't have to get gory all the time. We don't have to do all these provocative pictures. Let's just tell it like it is and let the truth play out. And that's the idea behind this museum. Fast forward to today, and a couple months ago, we released the Abortion Museum, a digital, fully interactive, digital format abortion museum that you can interact with at abortionmuseum.org. And you can see the history of abortion. You can see different cultural touch points with abortion. You can hear people's stories. You can find points of application if you want, if your heart is stirred and you want to reach out, you want to find some support, or you need counseling because this brings up memories of your own abortion. We have options in there for you so you can get the encouragement, the hope, the truth, the evidence, the arguments that you really need to know where you stand and why you stand there.
Very good. And I'm showing on the screen here, Bob's got it up so that we can kind of see some of the displays and what it looks like. I'm doing this in real time just so people know they're not watching a video. I'm actually manipulating it in real time while we're on the show here. So it's basically a giant circle. So here's the welcome message, and there's videos embedded throughout it. And
the videos are great. You have to stop and watch at least some of the videos.
Even if we're going to get to one very special video. But it starts off with the ancient world, which I think would surprise some people, that abortion is something that predates Christianity. And, this isn't just a religious fight. This isn't just a political fight. This is something that goes back a long ways. I'm just curious, like, why did you include, because a lot of things in here are sort of like a giant timeline too, a lot of timeline elements. Why did you include that historical component and starting with ancient times in the museum?
Well, when I was trying to prepare the exhibits for this museum, Now, I worked with a team. I got to give a shout out to Andrew Patterson, Jennifer DeFreitas, and Dan Hodges, and there were several other people that helped contribute. Of course, the people who volunteered to uh, for interviews as well. But when I curated most of the exhibits in this museum, and to do my research to prep for that, I would look for timelines of abortion history. And I surveyed what I could. Now, this is probably 4 years ago that I was doing a lot of the in-depth analysis here. And I couldn't really find all that much abortion history. The
Mm,
folks most concerned for it were largely part of the abortion lobby, so Planned Parenthood and similar organizations that had a vested interest in telling a particular narrative. Now, we all will lean on narratives. We all will have our biases. I don't deny that. But when we let our biases and our narrative um, interfere with the truth so that what is actually true can't be heard, that's when it becomes a malicious bias. And I wanted to be able to check against that by surveying, sources that will disagree with me and see, well, if it happened, it happened, whether I like it or not, whether it reflects well on pro-lifers or not, it's still fair game because if we're telling the history of abortion as part of our project here, then we need to tell it, good, bad, and the ugly. And so I would do these surveys and I would find that invariably the pro-choice advocates would start the abortion choice narrative from basically the early days of feminism. So we're talking 19th century, mid 19th century, so 1800s, maybe as far back as like 1830, but most of them started about 1890 because by 1890, every US state had a formal ban or heavy restriction against elective abortion. They would allow for therapeutic abortion, that is life-saving abortion, not just health care or it might help reduce her diabetes or something that is a medical risk but isn't necessarily life-threatening. I'm not talking about those cases. I'm talking about if there's a threat of serious injury or death, abortion was still legal in every state in America before Roe v. Wade, during Roe v. Wade, and that's still the case after Roe v. Wade. And so that's an important something that I wanted to include in this. But really, it was the campaign was led in the late 1800s by Christian advocates who were practicing medicine, and they were able to look inside, and they're getting more sophisticated in their medical technology, saying this is bad news. This is harming women. This is an indictment on your local communities when they're reverting to abortion. It means you're not protecting women. It means your families are falling apart. It means your neighborhoods aren't socially stable enough. It means you've got sex trafficking. It means you're trying to cover up misdeeds. And invariably, it means that women are suffering more because of it. And kind of there's sort of a ranking in terms of social priority. You had the most privileged males wouldn't suffer as much. You had the less privileged males might suffer a little bit more. And then you often had women and children that would suffer the most from the ailments of society. And so by 1890, every US state was banning abortion. Now it was frowned upon before then. It was informally illegal, like cities and states had restrictions and laws against it, but it wasn't all that clear and they didn't have their terminology standardized. Um, but that's 1800s. But what you would not find out if you were to do a historical survey of abortion in general, you won't find out that abortion was practiced for 3,000 years prior, 4,000 years prior. You wouldn't know any of that because that part of abortion history is left out. And one of the reasons it's left out is because up until about maybe like 1940, there was no such thing as safe, reliable, effective abortion.
Mm.
You
Mm.
could get two out of the three, but you couldn't get all three.
Yeah. And
You
all
could,
three are really important.
yeah, you could get a reliable result that would either, that wouldn't be safe 50-50, she might die, she might not. You could get effective abortion that wouldn't hurt the mother, but it would kill the baby, but it wasn't reliable. Or you could just have very unsafe abortion that you're going to get a dead baby out of it, and it's effective, but it's unsafe. So it's not going to have good metrics for the women involved, health metrics. And so you didn't have that till about 1940. And so the sweeping indictment against abortion for
Mm.
almost 4,000 years, is that there is no such thing as safe, effective, reliable abortion. And so it was an indictment against society.
I think that timeline is very interesting because it's 1940, maybe 1939, when Margaret Sanger's The Negro Project came about. And I'm wondering how much influence that had on safe, reliable, and effective abortions. But in the museum, you draw a connection between the Negro Project and today's abortion rates. And so as I'm listening to you talk about, this long history of abortion,
Mhm.
and now we come to a point in the mid 1900s where it's like, hey, now we have access to safe, effective and reliable abortions, but at the same time we have this Negro Project. What is that merger, and where do we see the connection between the Negro Project, the safe, reliable, and effective abortions, and today's abortion rates, even in the Black community?
Well, to talk about the 1940s, um, since we hadn't, things changed a good deal when you get to the 1960s. So I'm going to actually take a step or two back,
Hmm.
because there's a couple inflection points in the mid 19th century that are going to set a dim forecast for Black people in the 1940s, starting in basically the 1850s. Because you had three big things going on in the middle of the 1800s. You had Darwin's Origin of Species. If you've ever dug into that subject and you went back to see those charts of human skulls and how they ranked them in terms of evolutionary development, what do you notice about the ones that are less evolved? You notice, if you're paying attention, you'll notice the quote less evolved skulls, which I don't grant. I do not grant that they're less evolved. I just think they're different. Were invariably African. They represented the bigger lips, the bigger nose, the forehead. They were considered less evolved. And some of the evolutionary advocates in the mid 1800s said that Black people were closer to apes than they are to white men in terms of evolutionary development. That was evolution as a set of thoughts. Now, evolution, of course, is a very complex set of ideas. I don't want to get into all of it, but there were streams of influence within early evolutionary thought that would play into what would become scientific racism and eugenics. Put a pin in that. We'll get back to it because eugenics is going to be one of the big things that we're going to talk about with Margaret Sanger. Another thing, obviously, mid 1800s is the Civil War. You had escalating tensions, and the more you had partisan division, politicizing of issues that are racially charged, the less clearly people are thinking, and the more willing they are to pick sides without sufficient evidence because my brother's on this side, or those guys hate states' rights, or those guys just want to keep slavery installed. And the critical thinking and the dialogue and the debate and the marketplace of ideas basically gets frozen out because you've got an active war going on. And so the marketplace of ideas really suffers economically, so to speak, because the thought life at that time is all preoccupied with life and death issues on the battlefield. And so you had that feeding into the racial tensions. You combine that with evolution, and now people are like, "Oh, look at what this Darwin is talking about. Oh, that helps me explain why I think I'm better than Black people, or why um, we don't have to treat them with fully equal human rights because they're not fully human. And so it gave people a thin pretense for racism. Now, that's scientific racism. So that's evolution. That's um, that's the Civil War, and also Marxism. Marxism would play another key factor. So Darwin, I want to say he wrote um, uh, Communist Revolution along with Frederick Engels in 1833, something like that. It was mid 19th
Not
century.
Darwin. You mean
Not Darwin.
Marx?
I'm sorry.
Marx.
Marx. Yeah.
Yeah.
I almost said Richard Marx. Karl Marx.
Karl
Richard Marx is a fine musician. Uh, Karl Marx was writing in the mid 1800s, and that offered a set of ideas which wasn't strictly tied to race, but it would end up playing a factor um, as time went on. Strong ideological advocates of Marxism uh, began looking for disenchanted, angsty populations that they could kind of sweep into their communist revolution or Marxist revolution or socialist revolution. The lingo is secondary. The idea is that it's a Marxist worldview, even if you're a different denomination of Marxism, so to speak. And so they would often look for poor people to bring into agitate them and create revolutionary fires from that. They would look for women's groups who didn't have rights and try to sweep them in and agitate them for their people don't march in the streets and protest the government when they're content.
Mhm.
They don't do that when they're happy and they feel like things are going pretty good and they don't want to mess it up. When they are going to march in the streets is when they are discontent, when they're jobless, when they're poor, when they feel some gross injustice has been done. And so a lot of Marxists tried to capitalize on feminism in the mid to late 19th century, tried to capitalize. Can you hear me all right? My sound cut out.
Yeah, we're okay. Keep going.
Tried to sweep in and get poor laborers. And then what we would find later, and this takes us all into the mid 20th century in 1960s, uh, targeting Black people and minorities, saying we need to get you agitated and angsty and marching in the streets so that we can use your discontent. We can mobilize that for our Marxist revolution. And so even though it was only nominally related to race, it ended up becoming a big engine for a lot of racially charged revolutionary animosity from the 1890s into the mid 20th century and into today. So when we're talking about 1940, we're talking about a couple generations of, you might say, gestating those ideas. By the 1940s, you were having sort of late stage scientific racism, which had distilled into social policy, where we said, hey, let's try to socially engineer society through laws and policies so we can reduce the rate of criminality, which they thought was genetically based. And incidentally, that usually meant Black people. That's usually how they quantified it. They thought that they could they could sterilize people who were mentally handicapped, and they thought that was socially acceptable. And they wanted to reduce populations in poor communities, which were often non-English speaking immigrants and often Black communities. Here's where Margaret Sanger comes in. You've got a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist who is herself a representative of eugenics ideology, who buys into scientific racism, who does believe in white supremacism. Now, she didn't necessarily hate Black people. She had more of that kind of condescending old grandma kind of approach to the Black neighbor who's like, oh, those poor things, they just can't help themselves. They don't know better. Um, like pets or something, where they're not necessarily seen as equals, But out of the magnanimity of your heart, you're fine with having a certain population of them, just not too many,
Yeah.
because then they become problematic. That's a different kind of racism, but I think that's what represents what Margaret Sanger thought. 'Cause she wasn't, going out in the streets and shouting Allahu Akbar or anything crazy like that. She wasn't this militant, violent type of person, but she had something that was just as deadly because it came in the language of justice.
Mhm.
And that made it that much more palatable to people who felt like they had been treated unjustly. And so that's the Negro Project that she would introduce when she said, we need to get this social engineering program installed in Black communities. And they're not going to take it from me. That would sound like white splaining, but they will take it from their Black pastors
Yeah.
because the Black pastor is the bishop of the Black community. And they will take that on authority if it's coming from people that they trust in positions of authority in Black communities. And the Negro Project was basically Margaret Sanger's population control program to reduce Black and minority populations in Black and minority neighborhoods by influencing and persuading and enveloping Black pastors and priests into her social engineering ideology, which was Marxist and which was scientific racism. And it was a late stage development, I think, that traces all the way back to the same old racism that we fought a civil war over.
I don't think many people talk enough about Sanger's connection to Marxism and socialism. And I don't think many people know, but when you really investigate like her ways of thinking and what she wanted to do in the Black community and why she wanted to do it and the rhetoric she used and things like that, it's the same old tricks. It's the same old tricks. And I think that it's really important for us to understand her whole project, not just this, well, she was just racist and wanted to get rid of Black people. Like there's more nuance to it. And I really don't like that word nuance, but there's more investigation that needs to be done to be able to have a clear conversation on what the Negro Project actually was.
Yeah.
It wasn't that she just outright was like, I just hate all Black people. Let's get rid of those, blankety blanks. That wasn't the case. She actually had a foundational worldview underneath which
Mhm.
she was putting forward her ideology.
And ideology is the right word too. This isn't some fact-based science of social in of it wasn't sociology strictly in the strictest sense. Sociology was originally supposed to be a science of society. What we're talking about with Marxism is probably more in common with theology than any fact-based evidential type of work. Now, that's not to diss on theology, but theology can run the gamut of very fact-based, evidential, apologetics-oriented, or it can be totally harebrained with no basis in reality. It can run the gamut. And when you're talking about Marxism, you're often talking about undergirding ideological tenets that are unfalsifiable and that are ultimately faith-based. And they aren't so much what you see, but they are how you see what you see. And when you get down at that level, you're dealing in worldview. You're dealing in people's, you might say, the warm blanket of their soul that gives them a sense of security. And if you start tugging at that, people get really defensive. People get really irrational and really emotional. That's not to say that you can't have meaningful interaction and debate over Marxist stuff, but often what is going on is people have a Marxist worldview and they don't know it because it wasn't labeled when it was fed to them. And thinking in those categories, they have sort of backed into a Marxist worldview because they are more aware of critiques of capitalist excess and crony capitalism and free market abuse and monopolistic and rich powers, all of those things. They're aware of those critiques. And as a response to that, they back into this conflict theory basis of Marxism, where history is just a struggle between the haves and the have-nots. And they see everything in that very simplistic rubric. And then you end up from that posture tacitly accepting plainly bigoted perspectives. I have argued at length that if you are prejudiced against rich people, that's not at core any better than being prejudiced against poor people. There are good rich people, there are bad rich people. There are good poor people, there are bad poor people. Even if the ratios aren't the same, you still are faulting a group for the sins of an individual. And that's not fair. That is still prejudice. And if we're going to be genuinely humanitarian, this ties back into abortion. If we're going to be genuinely humanitarian in our worldview, if we're really going to assert equal human rights and live by that, then we're not going to use a double standard for Black people or white people, for women or men, for rich people or poor. And so that dichotomistic divide that tends to separate everything into the haves or the have-nots, it's simplistic. And so people accept, they like it. It helps make sense of the world, but it's got so many exceptions that it's not really true once you test it out. Uh, we could go on at length against the Marxism stuff, but I want to make sure we are able to tie back into Margaret Sanger. She wanted to sterilize Black people, and that was the original agenda of Planned Parenthood before abortion was legal. Once abortion was legal, they could say, okay, now we're cooking with bacon grease, and they could develop their game a little bit further and be more direct in targeting unwanted populations through abortion. And so Planned Parenthood, in relatively short order, in the span of about 10 years, from the mid 40s to the mid 50s, became a leading supporter of abortion choice. And today, the that's history now. We know that Planned Parenthood is the leading provider of abortions today.
Yeah.
But they were on that track because of Marxism, eugenics, scientific racism, and all of Margaret Sanger's bag of tricks.
Yep. I want to also highlight something that you said just a minute ago before we got down the Margaret Sanger track. Is just, at the height of, I think, first wave feminism, there was a lot of conversation around, Marxism and what does that look like? Where does this idea of liberation for women look like?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people really understand just how much the conversation of Marxism and liberation go together, especially for women, and how abortion can lead right into that. The idea that Margaret Sanger would come along and, want to liberate Black women, or, put this idea into the mindsets of pastors so that Black people can, be freed from their oppressors, so to speak. That idea, when we think about it, when we think about Marx's ideas for just wives and women and the family, and how do we liberate women who are in marriage, it comes all the way down to the abolition of the family. And so while I see Margaret Sanger as, this evil in, many Black communities and for women in general, the ideology itself wants to deconstruct the family and liberate the woman so that the woman is free from the oppressive male, so that she's not subservient to men, so that she's not having children, tagging on the hem of her skirts and things like that. That is what the project really is. And there's just not enough conversation about it. Abortion, I think, is one piece of that conversation. It's a huge piece, but it goes so in line with everything else about how do we abolish the family.
The institution of family is a God-given institution that predates the fall.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with an institution where you've got a perfect example. You don't have that with any other institution. You've got a perfect example. When Jesus was quizzed, they're trying to trick him, get him to slip up. When he was quizzed about a divorce case or something like that, something about marriage, he didn't take them back to David. He definitely didn't take him back to Solomon as his example. He didn't take him back to Moses or Jacob or Abraham. He took him all the way back to Genesis 2 and said, take a look at Adam. That's our reference point for what marriage should be, because it's got such a foundational role in preserving the better parts of society. So there is no institution apart from natural marriage and what it could be called traditional family. There is no institution that has proven as effective historically as natural marriage in these three things. And every society has to be able to do these three things, or it will collapse within a generation. You have to do these three things. You have to civilize the males. You need to take all that mischief, all that ferocity, all that strength that just wants to prove himself, and all that fight, and you need to direct it at something worth fighting for. And that's going to take a lot of strength, a lot of coaching, a lot of training, a lot of discipline to be able to take that and keep it from going haywire and make it a good thing. Because if it's not met with that equal and opposite force that will train it up in a good direction, then it becomes gang activity, it becomes deadbeat dads, it becomes serial criminality, that kind of thing. You have to civilize the male. You also have to, you might say, secure the female. Now that means two things minimally. I'm simplifying here, but you have to be able to provide sufficient provision and protection so that she has the emotional, social, and physical security so that when it comes to wife and mother roles, she has full freedom to exercise that. If she's having to work more outside the house than inside of the house because he's lazy and won't get the job done, then that's going to take away from her ability as a wife and as a mother. And that's going to mean a weakness for the family. You need to have enough provision, enough strength, enough securing influence that she has her needs met and she can flourish in those things that only women can do.
Mm-hmm.
Men can't make a baby. And so you need to empower women with as much freedom as possible to be able to produce the next generation, minimally. It gets more complicated, of course. But third, you need to be able to rear children. And historically, you don't have any government fabricated institution that can replicate what kinship family can do. You just don't have that. Adoption is okay. That's a fail-safe if you can't have both parents in a healthy way involved in that child's life. You can have fostering. You do what you can to make the most with all the tattered rags that are our broken families. You make the most of it. I get it. But if you don't have at least a strong core of your society that is traditional marriage or natural marriage and traditional family, then you're going to fail to civilize the male, secure the female, and rear the children. And if you can't do all three of those, you're going to implode within a generation. So abortion is an effort, but in large part by forces that want you to be married to the state and not to your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Because children, the want of support for raising your child tends to pull people closer to each other. And the natural solution to that historically, not just in Christianity, marriage is a cultural universal, not just a Christian norm, that pulls people into marriage. And they want that extra support to be able to raise that child because that's a big responsibility. And you're going to need some extra help. Someone's going to have to stay with the kids while someone else is working. You're going to have to take some turns. You're going to have to share some responsibilities here. You're going to have to figure out how to make that household work so you've got enough income so that you can pay for the diapers and keep that kid fed. And she's going to have to take time off work or be a stay-at-home mom so that she can do that, which means he needs to provide enough. And you have to figure something out that works. And you've got more options to make that happen in natural marriage than you do with any other institution, and yet still have some success at it. And so Marxism factors into that by saying divorce yourself from your spouse and marry the government effectively.
And we will pay you for it.
And we'll pay you for it. It's bribing you for votes.
We will give you your child care. We will give you your medical insurance. We will give you all of these things. Just marry me. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
The government is a
marry me
polyamorous.
we will allow you to kill your kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. The government is polyamorous.
No. Yeah. The government is a polyamorous monopoly when you let it be.
Yeah. Woo-wee. I could stay on that topic for a little while. I was actually searching through the Communist Manifesto to see where Marx was talking about the abolition of the family. I'm not sure if it's in Communist Manifesto. I have the complete works, and so that's what I was scrolling through real quick. But you're hitting on all his points, all the points. Yes. Chris,
Second,
go
you
ahead.
mentioned
Sorry.
first
Oh,
wave feminism. You mentioned first wave feminism, and I want to give a shout out of defense for first wave feminism because even though the loud minority that were often the figureheads that media celebrated from first wave feminism, that was often Marxists, and some of them were even card-carrying communists. The majority of first wave feminists, however, were like Quakers
mhm,
and Baptists and Christian women who, in the course of their biblical commitments, realize, hey, we actually have more dignity in a honest biblical worldview than most cultures have allowed us. And so the Quakers, who tend to be very egalitarian in their church operations, were disproportionately represented. Quaker women were disproportionately representative in first wave feminism. And if it were not for all those Christian women who were otherwise socially conservative, they're just like, hey, we're fully human. Why aren't we
mhm.
treated as such? But they were abolitionists. They were leading the charge against domestic abuse. They were leading the charge in defense for children's rights. And this was Christian women who weren't really interested in Marxism necessarily, but they could ally alongside of the Marxist feminists of the 1890s, 1900s because they said we deserve a right to vote and women's suffrage, which gets a bad rap, but the level of industrial abuse of people was driving a lot of men to drink and was making domestic abuse just rampant. And if you could at least cut off the tap, you could reduce a lot of alcohol-related crimes. So even though we're getting kind of a field from the abortion issue properly, that it does factor in because if you don't understand the institutions of church and family, then you're going to have a hard time understanding what there is left for government to cover. And if
Yeah,
you tend to revert to government to answer all your social issues, then you've got a weak view of church and family.
that is very well said. Go ahead, Krista.
So back to the museum. I want to point out a couple things here. I'm gonna have Bob put it back on the screen. This is the section you guys were just talking about,
Mhm.
feminism and women's rights. I want to go back and kind of turn around here so people could see that there's another wall and there's displays over here, and that there's a video here on this wall
Yeah.
related to scientific racism. And if you click here,
I wonder what we'll find there.
I don't know.
we will see a certain person. But these are like little videos that people can watch that kind of augment the museum experience. And so you guys sent out a filmmaker to our office a few years ago and interviewed Monique to be an exhibit in the abortion museum. And so people will see her contribution there. But these interactive components are definitely not to be missed. Now, if I guess what I'm wondering at this point is what would you say, John, to the pastor who is maybe very hesitant about talking about abortion from the pulpit? He feels like it's too politically charged. What would be your case or your word for him? You're sitting across from coffee with a pastor to tell him why his silence isn't neutrality. What would
Mm.
you tell him?
I would say your silence shouts very loudly that your church is not a safe place for women who have gone through abortion to find healing, help, and restoration at that church. Your silence speaks volumes in that regard because most pastors don't necessarily realize this, but estimates range as high and on average about 70% of women who have gotten abortions identify as Christian. Now, let's say that's a little exaggerated. Let's say it's closer to like 50 or 60%. If half the women out there who've had abortions this past year that's 500,000 abortions, and then you multiply that throughout all of abortion history, that means pretty much every congregation in America has women who've experienced abortion. And if you're not over communicating that this is a place where we stand for life, your child's life, and if you have undergone an abortion, know that there's forgiveness, know that there's healing, and we want to walk alongside you to help restore what that abortion took from you. We want to help restore the faith, the hope, the dignity, and to empower you as a woman so that you can find the healing you really need. Because abortion is violent. Abortion is traumatizing. Now, there's a loud and proud overcompensation element to a lot of pro-choice advocacy because it just doesn't sell well. It doesn't market well to communicate that abortion is sticking sharp things up inside of women and it's swirling around in there and it's tearing things apart and it's pulling things out and it's mangling a human body inside of the woman. And the experience feels like your baby is dying. And you as a mother who have a pre-programmed maternal instinct in you, your brain is hardwired with a distinctly female psychology. Your neurons, your neural activity, your brain chemistry, your biochemistry, your hormones, everything about you is orchestrated in such a way that you are able to create a human being and to care for that human being. And it will be the natural direction of yourself if you let it without interfering with in the form of abortion. And so you interfere with that process and it feels traumatic. Now, a lot of women, I'll grant some women are hardened or they're prepped for it. It's early enough. Maybe they're deluded. I don't want to say that every woman has the same experience. I couldn't say that. But many women who have had abortions testify that it's a pretty traumatizing thing. And so there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of harm that women have experienced in abortion, not to mention men who their girlfriends or wives aborted, and that was their child that died. The death of your child is a trauma. And the longer that churches stay silent on abortion, the longer we can expect abortion to persist in America. The reason abortion exists as a cultural institutional staple in America is because the church lets it.
Mm.
If the church really united with the heart of Christ on the abortion issue, we could make it so that abortion is a totally unwinnable position for any candidate that wants to run for office. We could make it so that anybody who said, I'm actually pro-choice, vote for me, would sound as silly as someone saying, I'm actually pro-slavery, vote for me. That's how the political game works. Politics has a way of co-opting everything. It's a colonizing power grab that tries to claim everything as political. That's another theme in Marxism, is to treat everything like it's politics. Well, honestly, who really wants politics to swallow up everything? I mean, really, who really wants that? Who really wants more politics in their NBA basketball? Who really wants more politics in their NFL sports? Who really wants more politics in their kids' cheerleading squad or on the swim team? We don't want necessarily more politics. Politics has a habit, and I'm speaking very generally, there's legitimate uses of political ideas and advocating. I'm not anti-politics in the proper sense. I'm talking about that kind of power grabbing, ambitious, let's make everything a billboard for my political party. That approach to politics just has a habit of chewing up everything and ruining anything it touches. And they'll do that with slavery, just like they did back in the 50s, making it a politically divisive issue. And timid pastors were like, well, I don't want to go political, so they wouldn't speak on it. They could say that about World War II. I don't want to go political. Some people say the Jews are responsible for all that's wrong in Europe right now. Some people say they're not. I'm not going to weigh in on the matter because I don't want to deal in politics. And today we could say, I'm not going to weigh in on abortion. It's politics. I'm going to stay out of it. Well, these bashful pastors who are staying out of it are leaving countless women in their own congregations uncared for, unsupported, because they are abortion survivors. And they need your help. They need your understanding. And on top of that, your congregation is struggling under the weight of ignorance, not knowing what to say or what they can do to help be part of the abortion, to be a part of solving the abortion problem in America. Pastors have an important role. Now, I get it. They got a lot on their shoulders. That's very hard. I don't want to be beating up on the pastors, but I do want to open their eyes that if they think they're helping by staying silent, they're unwittingly doing more harm than good.
Mm.
And that's a good word. It's really hard, and we want to support our pastors. They have a big responsibility and a big job to do. And yeah, like you said, there is a significant part of their congregation that is impacted by abortion. It's better for us to talk about it from the pulpit in a good way, a healthy way, a healing way, a factual way, rather than just avoiding it and being silent. John, I want to encourage people to go check out the abortion museum, take the virtual tour. Maybe it's something people can do together. Sit down with their kids at the big screen television and kind of navigate their way through it and talk through the displays. And there's just a ton of information there. And I love it that even if you go in the inner part, I don't want people to miss out in this kind of atrium that you have here, that there's even more displays in this area, as well as
Have you
testimonies.
clicked on that globe?
Oops.
Oh,
Oops.
and we have a whole website. You just clicked on the website that
Okay.
is affixed to it, where we've got blogs, we've got contact information, and if you like what you see or if you want to support it, we could always use your support. There's opportunities to donate and contribute because this is not cheap. We're working on a zero budget because all of our funds go right back into the museum to raise awareness and empower more people with the truth.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks, John, for hanging out with us and talking
Thank
about
you.
your project. And we wish you well on that.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
All right. God bless. Wow, Dr. Ferrer, he is it's not just like he knows about abortion. He knows about all of the other issues surrounding it and all of the impacts and everything. I feel like we got a college class there today. We really benefited from all of his wisdom.
I appreciate it because it's not just one issue, and people. It's important for us to understand that it's like a web of ideas. There's
That's good.
ways in which all of these things are connected. And, it's so easy for us to just get siphoned off on this one thing or this one topic and want to fight for this one topic and not realize the greater impact of the topic and how it's all connected. And no, we can't be experts on everything, but we can know a little bit about stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we see the connection. And I appreciated how John brought the connection between like the Civil War and scientific racism and, feminism and Marxism. And when you put all of those things into a bowl, what do you get when you stir it up a little bit? It's important to understand.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just such an important project because it's tackling it, kind of from a natural law perspective. It's not a lot of Bible verses, so it's something that you can, bring other people into the conversation if they're wanting to have a more scientific or philosophical or historical angle on it. It's a way of equipping yourself or sharing with other people. So, really great resourcing. That John and his team have developed there. It's sort of like if there was a Holocaust museum, meets, like a virtual online space. To me, that's kind of what this is the Holocaust museums. If you've ever been to one, very, very educational. You'll learn a lot. And you're thinking, I'm learning about this very morbid thing of the Holocaust. And that's kind of what the abortion museum is, but it's doing it in a tasteful and fact-based way. So
yeah. And then you leave equipped to go have a conversation with someone else.
yeah. So now next week we have our friend Dr. Scott Klusendorf on. We had Wes Fuller on a few weeks ago to do kind of a presentation about the abolitionist position when it comes to abortion. Had some letters from different people that took issue with some of the things that he said. But we're going to now have Scott Klusendorf on, that's sort of representing the more traditional pro-life position. We're going to have some follow-up questions for him. So it will be a live show. So if people want to tune in for that and weigh into the conversation, they can do that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I like Scott a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a friend. So it's good. All right, friends. That's it for this week. Well, hopefully you can always catch us on the family meeting on Wednesdays, which is sort of our more informal conversation where we talk about the news of the week, or we do more like reaction videos, or a little bit more lighthearted. This is the show where we do more deep dives into worldview conversations. You could also catch a replay of my live stream from last night, the Sunday night potluck, which is my kind of more informal stream where I talk about practical issues in the church. So got a lot of good things. Make sure you have the CFBU mobile app downloaded on your phone. That's the best way to stay in touch with all of our content across all of our platforms.
All righty. We will see you guys next week. Have a great week.
Grace and peace. There's nothing left.